Welcome, everybody, to session 2C, Engaging Men of Color in Efforts to End Violence. I am so thrilled to be the person who gets to introduce Justin, who I've been working with at NRCDV for a couple years now. I had the pleasure of working on a variety of projects with. Justin Carter, he, him, his of Carter Prevents is a rising leader in the field of violence prevention. Justin has worked with universities, nonprofits, state and local agencies on bystander intervention, consent education, Title IX, masculinity programming, and outreach with underserved populations. Justin promotes social justice, inspires intergroup collaboration, and cultivates a welcoming climate through facilitation, education, and evaluation. Justin has spoken at local, state, and national level conferences, podcasts, and rallies. Welcome, Justin, to this space, and I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It looks like a small, intimate group right now, but I'm sure folks will pop in as we go along. I just want to give a big thank you to my panelists. I know it was kind of scrambling a little bit to get some folks to talk about these things, but what's nice about being in this work is there's so many people that are connected, that are doing so many similar things, which is awesome. And I get to meet all these people and get to talk with them and get to work with them. So I'm so excited to be here today. And thank you again to our panelists who are here, who I'm going to tell you a little bit about right now. Also to my panelists, I did not get y'all's pronouns, and I think that was a mistake of my part. So if y'all want to change your names with your pronouns on there on the Zoom, I would appreciate it. Mine, he, him, I can change mine in there too in a second. But yeah, I'll read y'all bios in a second. But yeah, as y'all are doing that. Also, if there was something else that I didn't say that's not on here in the bio, please feel free to speak up and give those expertise that y'all are doing already. And then also for our participants, and Casey said that we're going to be limiting some of the questions that are in the chat. However, if you do have a question, I do encourage you to use the raise your hand feature to be bold and ask those questions to our panelists. I have plenty of questions already, so I'm going to be asking those. But if you do have questions, please feel free to do that as well. All right, so first we have Paul Turner. Paul is the program director for the Boys and Girls Club in the Austin area. I believe it's Home Club, that's where he's at. He has dedicated most of his professional career to the betterment of young people. In his free time, Paul enjoys spending time with his wife and children, making music and exercising. Paul is one of my really good friends too, who I've had the pleasure of working with at the Boys and Girls Club. So I'm glad that Paul is here today. And Shay, is it Shay? Am I saying that right? Shay or
no, Shaw?
Shaw. Okay, it was either Shay or Shaw. So appreciate you. All right. So Shaw Lilly is an Expect Respect facilitator for Safe Alliance in Austin, Texas. Shaw runs boys group through several school districts in Austin, Texas areas that focus on fostering healthy relationships with youth that may have experienced or witnessed domestic violence and sexual assault. Before his current post, Shaw had worked with youth in substance abuse prevention programs, as well as delivered lessons on reproductive health to students in disadvantaged areas. Shaw has worked with youth for the last 9 years in various social emotional learning capacities and is currently working on receiving his master's in social work to further his career in social development. So where are you getting your master's at? What program is that?
Texas State.
Okay, cool, Texas State. My background's in social work, so.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. So I just started in August.
Sweet. Well, I just started my master's program in August too, so that's nice. We got a little.
Oh, where are you at?
Yeah, I'm at the University of Texas.
Oh, okay, UT. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right,
UT. I forgot people say UT. Where I'm from in Ohio, UT means University of Toledo.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought this was a super based in Texas, so everyone did. I went back and changed and made sure I said Austin area instead of like Manor ISD or Del Valley, because they're like, what is that? But yeah, sorry. Being in Austin, UT, yeah.
Definitely understand. And then our last panel member is Glenn Harris, who is the Assistant Director of Prevention responsible for gender-based violence prevention, training, and support geared towards creating and supporting communities where all people can live a life free of violence within their relationships and establishing healthier definitions of masculinity and healthier norms surrounding gender-based violence. Glenn's primary role is engaging men and boys in domestic and sexual violence prevention with the Ohio Men's Action Network. Shout out to OMAN. In this role, Glenn will facilitate the OMAN presents the new playbook, Standing Strong, Promote Nonviolence, and facilitate various conversations with stakeholders across Ohio. Prior to ODVN, Glenn's background includes working in an array of areas responsible for fatherhood, ex-offender, reentry, and youth monitoring. So thank you, Glenn, for being here. Like I said, I have some established roots in Ohio. Glenn was in doing a lot of things that I was doing back when I was with the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. So I'm so glad that he's here with us today to be talking about some of the things that OMAN is doing too. So again, I've said this 3 times already, but thank y'all. I cannot thank y'all enough for coming to this panel. But we're gonna get started with our first question. So our first question is, what is society telling us about what it means to be a man? And I'll put this in quotation marks, right? What does it mean to be a man?
Is there an order that we want to go into, or are we just going to hop?
I think y'all can just kind of hop around. What I'm going to do is just pin y'all to the front. So whoever wants to go first, please take a crack at it. Just be conscious if you've taken a lot of space, and if you haven't taken enough space, I encourage you to add in. So feel free to do as you please.
Cool. I could take the first one if y'all are okay with that, fellas, Paul and Glenn. Paul, you remember me? We kickball with, okay.
Yeah, no, I remember.
Yeah, okay.
Kickball,
yeah. Yeah, as far as what society tells us about how to be men, to quote Justin, I think it kind of spills after the first question on that document about what is masculinity. I think it's high energy, if I could use it in its rawest form and combine it together. I think society tells us to be very dominating in almost everything that we do. We must win whatever game we're playing as far as what it means to be a man. You know, when we talk to each other, we clown at each other. We got to be the better clown at each other in a relationship, a heterosexual relationship. We have to be the breadwinners. I think very dominating is the sense of what it means to be, what society tells us to be a man, specifically in the westernized world, coming from the patriarchy aspect of it.
Yeah, just to take that a step further, I say society just pushes young men and boys to have power, control, and dominance in whatever aspect we're dealing with, whether it's sports, relationships, whatever it is, power, control, and dominance. And I think on the opposite end of the spectrum, I think society teaches us to laugh at or make fun of anything that doesn't fit, that mold, that isn't that. I mean, you think back to, television shows like Family Matters. The joke of the show was Urkel. He's not a man. He's not the, manly type of guy. Same thing with shows like Big Bang Theory. Make fun of the guys who are, the academic guys, so on and so forth. Society teaches us to make fun of and laugh at those that don't fit that atypical manhood structure.
Yeah, I agree with Glenn and Shah. And also one thing that I guess I can point out is, picking yourself up. I guess I'm gonna use a cliche, but pick yourself up in your bootstraps, right? Like when you think about it, men, when we fail, we don't have, we're perceived to be able to pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off and keep going. And if we do fail, sometimes there's an asterisk next to your name. kind of like shunning the growth mindset, understanding that things kind of take time and failure is a good thing. So being a man, you got to have it figured out. You got to know right from wrong. You got to know how to lead. Kind of going off of what Sean Glenn mentioned, you have to dominate your space. So I agree with those two.
Yeah, like to add, because of those dimensions, it almost doesn't allow us to have to be at peace. So there's a lot of things that we do. We almost get penalized peace and being fully present and mindful as far as our spiritual walk, our financial walk, emotions. So being hyper masculine at all times, it's difficult to make a mistake because the world will judge you for making that mistake. So making mistakes is just part of life, but that's how we learn. But we do get penalized for showing those emotions and being able to to have that balance and operate in different circles. So it makes us hard. Makes it really difficult for us to be better partners and to foster communication and to show that sensitive side, because people are going to judge you for being sensitive, and there's nothing wrong with that. But being hyper masculine at all times keeps us out of sync with our partner, our children, significant others, co-workers, and colleagues. So I think once we shift that paradigm, it'll make it much more easier for, even men to accept other men, to accept being, hyper masculine or, intellectual, musical, or artistic, and we should be able to exist in all realms without being pigeonholed into one dynamic.
Thank you, Lamont, for sharing that. That's how you pronounce your name, right?
Correct.
All right, awesome. I appreciate you. Thank you all for your answers as well. Moving on to our next question, and this is kind of ties into that first question. We talked about what does it mean to be a man in society, in our society, but I'm curious about how you all would describe masculinity. If you had to give a definition to it, your ideal definition, what would that definition be?
I think I can go first again if you want to just go with that pattern. It's about, like I said, very high energy, and I came to that conclusion with using it in traditional binary between femininity and masculinity, where masculinity is way more high energy and femininity is more softer, nurturing thing. And it's not good or bad to be one or the other. They just are. Being human, you're both. You're gonna have high energy. You're gonna have low energy. You're gonna be nurturing, and you're not gonna be nurturing. But I think it gets tied to masculinity and maleness when it becomes the power structures we were talking about. That's when it becomes negative, because you're trying to win a game that no one else is playing, and you're doing anything to get that far. In a perfect world, though, if in its raw form, masculinity is high energy, the perfect form would be assertiveness, where it's a balance between I'm going to tell you what I want, and we're going to react after that. I'm not going to be too passive or too aggressive. It's I am who I am, and I'm making myself known in a more positive way. That's what I think the positive aspects of masculinity looks like. And I think you see that in many different aspects, not just from men, but from all genders.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that is I think there are little subtle changes as you go from community to community. What it looks like in a suburban community may be slightly different than in a rural community, which may be slightly different than in an urban community. But I think the underlying premise, they're pretty much all the same, little small, adjustments based on our community, especially when we're talking about, urban communities, that masculinity oftentimes gets wrapped up into, sexual prowess. It gets wrapped up into our perceived economic status, so on and so forth. And we get lost in some of these things that aren't truly masculine qualities, but in our urban communities, we get, misinformed.
Yeah, I like Glenn's take on masculinity kind of having different shades in different communities. I think that's a refreshing take and something I've never heard. So I do appreciate that. And it's something I'm probably going to think on after this. But one thing I guess I can say going off of what Lamont stated earlier was what masculinity looks like to me and ideally would be a man that's willing to laugh when he feels like he needs to laugh, was willing to cry when he feels like he needs to cry, is willing to express himself in a healthy way, and backing off of Shah as well, having that energy and assertiveness in a healthy fashion to state your point without stepping over somebody, you know? So ideally, I feel like that's what masculinity would look like in today's time.
Yeah, I agree with everybody. I think because society and because we're evolving, so much more spiritually and intellectually. I just think having that room to make adjustments. I mean, that's what we do as human beings. We make adjustments, and we're able to cultivate or assimilate into any environment. And I think having the freedom to be able to do that is just what's going to make us, evolve as men. It's just having the room to grow and to evolve.
Awesome. Lamont, where are you from? Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, okay. My name is Lamont Sanders. I'm originally from Houston, Texas. I am a veteran. I just completed, I did 27 years in the United States Navy. Now I'm serving as a sexual assault victim advocate here at Joint Expeditionary Base Little Creek. And I'm a life coach. So I just, I've just been trying to do my part to bring awareness to our plight as men, because we've gotten such a bad rap. And I started this journey because I'm a child of domestic violence. So I grew up in the 70s where everybody had to be a pimp, everybody had to be a Mac. My father, my uncles, they were all, hyper masculine, abusive, drug users. So, but they were awesome. They were awesome men, but I watched them struggle with being able to make the shift from being a breadwinner to a husband, to a father, and where my father may have failed as a husband, he excelled as a dad. So I saw that there was no space for him to be all things and to make mistakes. So it was easier for him to drink and to drug and to continue to make mistakes and not being able to make the shift. So as early as I could, I joined the military right out of high school because I needed that structure. I wanted to get out of the hood, but I couldn't bring change to an environment while being there. I had to go acquire those skills elsewhere. So I joined the military and I made my mistakes, and I sought out the right mentors, and here I am today.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing your story. And also thank you for your service as well. I'm honestly going to just put you as another panelist that we have too here today, because you have been given some excellent insight. So if you feel comfortable, I'd love for you to join our panel too.
Hey, not a problem.
And our panelists okay with that? Y'all good with that? Perfect. All right. So I'm going to put you on our.
I appreciate your service, man.
Appreciate you. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right. So moving on to the next question. So the next question is all about what ways are we working with our men and boys, right? We're all in this effort to create a change in our society, especially the dominant perspective of what it means to be a man, right? And so I'm curious from you all are, what have you found helpful when teaching men and boys about nonviolence?
I think a
for
big
me-
part. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Glenn.
No, go ahead, Sean.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I was because being in this facilitator / counselor position, I work with boys both individually during counseling sessions as well as group stuff. And I think the biggest or most effective teacher would be empathy and understanding and appreciating their feelings, whether they're right or wrong, because they did something based off of what they thought was quote unquote right at the time. And to dismiss those beliefs dismisses them because they came up with them on their own. But by acknowledging them, going like, I understand why you called that girl the B word. I get it. I would be upset too if such and such did this, but let's think about a better way to handle this, because you wouldn't like being called the B word. And then, so it starts with going, yeah, I get it. I get why you're upset. And then without calling them out, not without saying you're wrong right away, it's kind of subverting it and go, well, how would you feel if you were called such and such? So I think empathy gets to the bottom line of their motivation, because they aren't, because like I said, with like I talked about with masculinity in general, the negative side of it being the power hungry part of it. When we're in contact, we're in conflict, right? That's two guys. You know, like if I'm the counselor, they're the student, they're trying to one up me regardless of anything else. So that fight is always going to be there. So diffusing the fight with going, no, I get where you're coming from, helps them see a little, just, it's not going to be perfect, but it's a little bit more of, I get where you're coming from. I know why you did what you did, but let's figure out something else because I want you to be quote unquote better.
Yeah, for me, it's being realistic and relatable. Like I have to come to you and approach you in a way that you can relate, that relates to your experience. Justin, if you can remember the first like set of t-shirts when I came on board, I had all these t-shirts printed up for young men to say, you know, I will not commit violence, right? But in some urban communities, I started getting challenged with that with some young men. And it's like, you know what? I see violence every day. My mom taught me if somebody hits me, hit them back. You know, and there's different urban things that you have to deal with. So I tried a new approach, and the new approach is a campaign we're doing now, which is know better, do better, be better. And versus telling that person not to be violent, I'm just asking you to know better, do better. Don't be the initiator. You know what I mean? Don't always have to feel like you have to respond to those situations. So it was finding a way to have a conversation that was relatable to their experience to say, look, I get it. You got to defend yourself out in this urban jungle. However, also be the one that knows better, do better, not out here initiating the violence, not out here instigating the violence, you know, as we do in many situations, and understanding, having a conversation with each individual in a way that they can relate to that conversation and buy in.
Yeah, so I think a lot of spot on. And what I do here at the Boys and Girls Club is, you know, we work with youth, urban youth, and we have those moments where these young people, they get volatile, they bump their heads, you know, they're getting ready to throw down straight up. And what I do is I use it as an opportunity to give them the tools to work through those emotions, right? So it's like, instead of saying, hey, Jimmy, you shouldn't have hit John, you know, it's like, okay, Jimmy, why did you feel the need to do so? Like, I see that you're angry. Why is that? What made you get to this point? It's like understanding that we all have these emotions. We all have these things that we need to work through, and giving them the tools to work through them. That's kind of how I approach working with young boys and young men in this space. Coming at it with empathy and understanding. Also, you know, at the end, also let them know like there is a right and wrong when it comes to certain situations, but not coming with that stick from the beginning. Letting them know that there are ways for us to work through these emotions in a healthy way. That's one of the approaches that I have here at the Boys and Girls Club.
Yeah, I think you know, growing up in the military, it taught. I think one of them is we always say adapt and overcome, and we prepare for anything. But I think one of the greatest lessons I learned was you know, he who controls others is powerful. He who controls himself is a master. And I think that a lot of times we don't impart that to our young boys. I mean, it's a martial arts principle. And, you know, I think the greatest thing that martial arts teaches is that, you know, we teach you self-defense, but to defend others. And I think a lot of times the greatest thing is just being able to and look at the situation. I think a lot of times we don't look at the situation while we're in it. We just react. And but of course, when you are in the hood, not reacting can cost you your life. So I think we just looking at, like you said, Paul, what could we have done better? Addressing the situation after the fact will give us, a greater mindset into how to talk to our brothers, talk to other young men, and still maintain that respect. Um, but we still have to teach them, to be in control of our emotions, in the sense that we are, forever mindful and not reactive, especially because violence is only going to create or begat more violence. So it's difficult to break that cycle if we don't break the mindset.
Yeah, I mean, just to go off of Lamont, and like I said, I'm in my social work program now, and we're going over the difference between the psychoanalytical approach versus cognitive behavioral approach, where psychoanalysis deals a lot with the emotional response. So that mindset breaking doesn't come until we understand the emotional toll underneath it, right? So growing up in, stereotypical concept of what it means to be the hood, or honestly, what it means to be Black in America. Everything is a threat because we are who we are. So that emotional response to situations is a lot of place of fear for survival. It's like if I don't pull up on someone, I'm a punk, and now everyone's gonna punk me, and now I gotta sacrifice parts of myself to survive for the next day. And I think with boys, the teaching comes from the mentorship, and the mentorship comes from knowing who that kid is. And knowing who that kid is giving them an escape for that 45 minutes, for me at least, that you're with them, where I don't expect you to be anything else than just a 12-year-old, right? Because so many times Black kids, all genders, don't get to be a kid. And it's always about, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. But it's like, no, just be a kid for 30 seconds. And then let's see what that looks like. And then we can go with fostering a better relationship. That's where relating comes from. That's where the empathy comes from. That's where teaching them comes from, is who are you, so I can meet you where you're at. So I can say something to you that hits with you than just a generic response to something, right? Because don't do drugs. Yeah, I got it. I'm not supposed to do drugs. That's not but why are you doing drugs is the real question to overcome drug use in general.
Yeah, and taking that, and this is relating to both what Sean and Lamont both said. In the mentoring program, we have this model we use with young people, and we call it keep your eye over your E. That's your intellect over your emotion. You should always be leading with thought in your mind versus your heart and your emotion. And the minute that your heart and your emotion take over, that's oftentimes where young men and boys start to go astray, because our emotion is leading that. And we use different real world examples and point to them and say, look, emotion led to that particular situation because emotion drove it. We've all been accused of being that angry Black guy in the room. We have that conversation about, let's use your intellect, and not always, it's great to have emotion. It's great to have passion, but in a controlled sense. So in the way that it can be articulated, in the way that it can be received. So we talk to the young men all the time about using the intellect and be cautious with emotion.
Such valuable things said on the panel. I'm over here holding myself back because I'm like, I want to say something. But I think y'all have covered so much of that, and I appreciate it. I just want to give a reminder to our participants. I see there are some questions that are popping up, and I really appreciate that. But we are going to have some time for questions, and I'm going to get to your questions in a moment. Just want to make sure that we're asking all the questions that we have set out first. But with that being said, how are we as men, or even as boys, taking accountability on ourselves to call out bad behavior, or how to hold our peers accountable? How are we doing that as Black men, as men and boys who you all are working with? How are we doing that to make sure that we have some type of accountability, and maybe even talk about why that's important too?
Yeah, I think if I'm going to go left a little bit here, I'm going to go off path, and I want to pose an idea, and y'all respond to it and let me know. With the calling out only works if you give them grace for them to fall back on. So if I say to a kid, you shouldn't be listening to X, Y, and Z, and I don't follow up with, why would you listening to X, Y, and Z? What does that say to you? What does that say for you? Because I recently just went back and listened to Biggie Smalls' Ready to Die album, and I'm like, damn, this guy has so much trauma. Why would he say something like that? And then all you get through for real. When you go back and you look at it, it's like, was anyone, Biggie, you shouldn't be saying that. You shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be using the N-word. You shouldn't be doing that. Well, what should he be doing? What is the role model that follows? Because mediating the concept of free will is choice. And I don't want to be this square dude. I want to be Biggie. Well, let's make this guy more relatable and understandable than this guy. You know, the reason why people rejected Bill Cosby, minus all the sexual assault stuff, was you kept judging every person instead of giving them a mindset to follow. You know, like, I don't see nowadays a Martin show where, like, I want to be Martin or Fresh Prince. I want to be Uncle Phil. It's a lot different. So I think the accountability comes from giving someone a space or an option that helps them moving on anyway. Because everyone knows what bad is, but what does good look like? And what does good look like for someone who grew up like Biggie Smalls? Carlton Banks is never going to relate to Biggie Smalls. But we have a lot of kids relate to Biggie Smalls, and what's that antithesis? What's that more positive role model? Why didn't anyone help Biggie before he was able to write Ready to Die? I guess that's the kind of answer to that. Is accountability only matters if you have someone to fall back on, some grace to give.
Yeah, I'm huge on that same space too. Like, that's my biggest issue kind of with cancel culture, because it doesn't give anyone space to grow, to learn, you know, from whatever mistake it is that, you know, they made, whatever transgression they made. Oftentimes, those people who make those transgressions and then learn and grow from it are the best people to go back to those that are still making the mistakes and say, this is how I evolved, and this is why I evolved. This is what I learned. And if we're not going to give that individual that space and that opportunity, I think that's my biggest issue. You know, if cancel culture had a way to say, hey, that behavior was unacceptable, here's why, and here's your opportunity to change. If that was the approach, I'd be all for it. But I think the approach now is, nope, you messed up, shut up, you're gone, you're canceled, you're out of society. And I have a hard issue with that approach.
Yeah, and I agree. I think going back to what Charles mentioned a couple of questions back about approaching things with empathy is huge. It's yeah, I mean, we look at like, if I were to just to reduce this to a math problem, you can't solve the problem without identifying the problem, right? We get that, but we need to be able to solve that problem. We need to be empathetic, understand that this. If I could just state, like, we like to attach the behavior to the person without taking that person away from that behavior, right? So I see JP, I'm just using an example, kid named JP come to my club. He may have had a rough day. He may have woke up this morning, didn't have cereal made. He had to rush to school, and JP decides to slap a kid. It's like, instead of us saying, you know what, JP slapped this child, like, why did you slap this child? We're like, JP, you shouldn't do this. You did something wrong. We didn't dig deep and say, okay, why is JP doing this? What did JP, why is JP having such a rough day? Like, what is it that led JP to have this act? We need to be able to separate the behavior, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, from the human being, the person. And then from there, I think we can actually instill certain behaviors, kind of like what Lamont was stating, with being able to master your emotions, control your emotions, and understand when is the right time for you to assert yourself and when is the time for you to, you know, let me just walk away. So being able to call out a problem, yeah, that's important. But we also have to have grace, like what was mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I like what you had said, especially bringing it back to mastering the emotions. You got to feel the emotions first. Because if JP never felt angry, me telling him to not feel angry, he's not going to know what that means when he's not supposed to do it. So if we go, you have the space to be angry. You have the space to curse somebody out, not in front of them, but do it. I'm the lightning rod. Hit me with what you got. And we can talk about why when you get angry, the first thing you want to do is stab somebody. Because if we don't, they're going to get, yeah, I'm not angry until you get to that breaking point and you stab somebody and your life is thrown away because no one told you how to process your emotions when you were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13, 14, 18, 22. So I think that goes with that.
And kind of go along with this, like, for example, Justin, it was probably a little over a year ago. I don't know what I was reading, but I came across this Maya Angelou quote. And the Maya Angelou quote said, "I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better." And that's exactly where we got our campaign name from. Know better, do better, be better. For the first 35 years of my life, I called a particular t-shirt a wife beater. Why? Because I didn't know any better. I didn't realize the impact. I didn't realize the harm that it caused. But now that I know better, I do better.
I'm glad you guys say that, because one of my favorite things is I love mentoring young men on intimate relationships. And probably one of the areas that men struggle the most in is relationships with their significant other, their partners. And so one of my brothers called me. He said, "Hey man, my wife, she did X, Y, and Z, and I just need to process it." And I'm like, "All right, cool. Let's go out. Let's go. So what we did was we went out to the beach, and I said, and I started to kind of regress him back a little bit, and because normally what I wanted to show him was really why your spouse is mad. What you argue about is what she's not really mad about. And so what I started to talk to him about was, how we listen, and then how we filter the information. And I think that's another a component for us is, we listen to respond, and we're not really listening to be fed, or listening to understand. And I think once you understand, teaching our young men how to understand our partners is going to be a great segue for us to open up communication. And in turn, we won't weaponize what we say against each other to cause hurt. And it's probably the biggest thing that we struggle with as men, because we interpret a lot of things that our partners say as being weaponized against us. Just to learn that, not everything that's being said is used to hurt us. So process what our partner is saying, and then summarize it, give it back to them, and make sure it's clear, and then that and foster greater communication. It's probably one of the most difficult skills to learn. It took me into my 30s and my late 30s, early 40s to learn that concept, because it wasn't taught to me. It wasn't given to me as a young man.
Wow, that's deep right there. I appreciate you for sharing that. And thank y'all for all sharing that. I can't believe we are running out of time already, but I'm going to try to ask a couple more questions before we get into some audience questions. The next question I have, and we kind of been talking about this, but just thinking about our relationship with women, right? Or our relationship with those who identify as women, and maybe those who don't identify as women, but don't identify as male. And so thinking about that, and so my next question is, why do you think men find it difficult to advocate for women who are experiencing violence? What contributes to not speaking out about that?
It's tough.
I think it definitely is, because this is not a one-size-fits-all answer, right? But I think the philosophy that a lot of guys have, male culture, is logical thinking versus dominant critical thinking. So logical thinking is, well, if you're getting hit, just leave. Why would I stick up for you when you could just leave? That's what I would do. I would just leave, Whereas critical thinking is, well, why wouldn't a person who's in a relationship leave? Let me ask them that question before I give them advice. Logical thinking is, you should date someone who really cares about you. Critical thinking is, well, most men are very tricky and conniving and can manipulate you. And not for nothing, when you're taught to court women, you're taught to go after women or say these things that they like. If you look at, I know she needs to hear that she's pretty, so I'm going to tell her she's pretty. I don't care that she's pretty or not. So I think it's part of that. And then the outside looking in, I think it's a very logical thing, is logically speaking, don't be somewhere where you're going to get hurt. Okay, that's easy to say because it's logical, but like Paul had mentioned, the math problem, you can't solve a problem without knowing all the variables. And variables need to come into play when you're thinking critically. I worked in the shelter. I've worked with so many different avenues and stuff. And you hear stories and you go, I didn't know that. Like, I'm from New York, so everywhere is not rural. Like, there's no rural areas at all. If you want to go to Brooklyn, I can get on the train and go to Brooklyn, no problem. I can leave and that's that. In a more rural area, I can't just get up and go. I just can't, I can't.
Yeah.
You know, growing up in this heavily Christian environment, monogamy is taught all the time. So we get with someone, you're taught to stick through that person no matter what. Where I grew up, that's not really the case. It's a very open kind of thing. So I think it's logical versus critical thinking that comes into to play for men.
And for me, I think oftentimes it's A, not really knowing what it means to advocate for women, and then being kind of, it's this misconceived notion that, advocating for women means we got to be out marching, holding signs and doing all these things, but it's the more silent things that we can do. Like, for example, as men, we've all received that phone call from, a female family member, hey, come over here, he just did X, Y, Z. And our immediate response is to come bring fire to an already violent situation. You're just making that situation worse, and that's not advocating. And if we don't know that young lady, our immediate response is to A, go directly to her and provide assistance. Hey, are you okay? Is there something I can do? Can I call somebody for you? Can I do this? But very rarely do we go have a conversation with that perpetrator, whether we know him or not. And that's where the real advocacy comes in, changing that behavior of that male, having that conversation and say, look, bro, I saw what you did, yesterday or earlier today, and that just wasn't cool. That's not great behavior. That's not the way men should act. You shouldn't act like that towards, women, so on and so forth. It's those conversations that are so much more important, so much more valuable, that go a long way when it comes to advocating for women for me.
That's a great response. Kind of piggyback off that, just giving men the tools to know how to advocate, right? So it's such a nuanced thing. You're dealing with violence, you're dealing with aggression, and I think we need to normalize mentoring and mentorship that gears towards healthy masculinity and how you approach these things, right? When we think of mentorship, we think of the archetypical, Mr. Miyagi sense, but it's like we need to figure out a way in which we give these young men tools to learn how to advocate, understand, and listen to someone that does not identify as a man, so that we can be advocates for them. And that's my biggest thing on this. Like, we need to understand how to do it, because such a nuanced space. Going back to what Shaw mentioned in the beginning, and I think Glenn mentioned also how men, we want to dominate a space. If you give us the green light, we're just going to go and speak on it. It's like we need to be able to have those men, or those that can speak on this topic, that have that wisdom, kind of guide younger men, specifically boys, because I was working in the space with young boys, how to do that in a way that is tasteful, in a way that is not domineering,
And Paul, you're so right. I think oftentimes men think the only way for me to interject in this situation is directly, like to directly jump in and get involved. And there's so many other ways that whether it's, delegating to someone who may have more influence in that situation, or maybe delaying it to a later point in time. But there's so many other ways that we could, advocate in that situation versus getting directly involved.
Yeah, I think 100%, when Lamont had talked about communication and understanding and stuff like that, we just listened to respond. Like you guys are saying, you want to get in and dominate. I know we're going to call the cops. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. But if you could put yourself in the shoes of someone who had just been assaulted, whether violently or sexually, the last thing I want to do is tell their story to everybody out there. Mm-hmm. It's just be there shut up and be there. It's not, you don't have to have a conversation. No one needs your unsolicited advice. People are smart enough to figure some stuff out on their own. Just be there. And that part is so hard, because we are, like a society, told, get in there and dominate, be that force, be the person. Do not let other people lead in front of you. And that is the big issue. So when you guys just sit down and be with that person, that's where, let them tell you what you wanted. Can you surrender to someone else and take the lead from there for advocacy, really?
Sean, I love what you just said, because we worked in our fatherhood group. The phrasing that we use there is control versus influence. Don't stop looking for control. Stop looking for control and think, how can I best influence this situation? Like you said, as men, we're taught, jump in there and take control, get control. No, what you really want is influence.
Right. I'll tell you something that I've done with my daughter. So I got 5 girls. And one of the things that I do for them is, like, every summer I take them to the Samaritan house. or the YWCA. And what I want them to know is about services that exist within our community, outside of our community, that we never tap into. So I took them and I let female counterparts talk to them about relationships, domestic violence, human trafficking. So it doesn't always come from me. I realize that, the people that we mentor, the people that we raise will often they'll get kind of tired of hearing the same rhetoric from us. So I solicited other people, even my sorority sisters in the Deltas and the Alphas. I put them around other professional women, and I do the same thing for the young men. Just want them to be able to reach out and tap into resources that they never thought existed. And I think that's the biggest thing too, is just in our communities, some of those resources don't exist anymore, like the YMCA for men. I don't really see those too much where I am in Virginia, but I do see the Salvation Army. So there's so many resources out there that men just don't tap into it because of pride. And also just allowing our young women to know that, hey, there are resources out there for you, that if you need to leave a situation, there's a safe and healthy way of doing so.
Thank you so much for answering that question. Like I said, we are running out of time, and we got some really great questions in our chat. However, I'm not sure how much time we'll have to answer both of the questions. So what I'm going to do is read both of the questions, two questions that we have, and then give it up to y'all to answer one of those two. If you need me to repeat it, feel free to do so. Okay, is that cool? All right, sweet. All right, so the first question is, someone asks, how effectively have you been communicating about domestic violence with clergy, pastors, and deacons? Obviously, we know that this is a huge influence on a lot of folks, especially people of color, especially men. But how do we effectively communicate nonviolence with those folks? So that's question number one. And then question number two is, so we got to hear from our women of color advocates in the opening panel about what's needed to center their voices and their leadership in this movement, domestic violence, nonviolence, things like that. I would love to hear from the panel of Black men, how reflecting on our movement and how we can better center your voices and your experiences. So I know those are two real loaded questions, but I didn't want to get off this chat and not say one.
I want to tackle that first question because I feel like that question needs to be asked. I'm not going to lie, I don't have the answer to it, but that question is powerful because for one, there's an institution that is being utilized in a way to hide, or I guess be a veil to violence, right? Whether it be sexual, domestic, however you want to cut it. And we need to have these conversations, period, point blank. I know for a fact I've experienced this as a young man growing up in the church, seeing women or people that have identified as women be abused in the church, and it kind of be turned a blind eye be turned to it. And we have to figure out a way, specifically in the church and the Black church, how we have these conversations and call that stuff out. That's something I do think we need to call out, because I might be wrong, but I feel strongly about that. I've know people that I love that have experienced that kind of stuff, and it just went kind of to the wayside. So I don't have an answer to that question, but that was a great question, a brave question. I think we need to spend more time figuring out ways to solve that and answer that.
Yeah, I think I'm with Paul. You take it again a step further. I left the church because of stuff like that. So viscerally speaking, not reflectively, not consciously, I'm talking emotionally speaking right now. What Shah's about to say is, I don't want to go back because of my experiences with the church. Now, thinking about it out loud, that is so wrong. So it's up to me to figure out where that middle ground is. But the second question is, for me, the answer is, centering our voices means us not having a voice. Meaning we give up our voices because it's not our fight to lead. I don't know what it's like to be a woman, to be in domestic violence situation. I also don't know what it's like to be sexually assaulted. I don't know what it's like to be afraid to walk at night to my own apartment from my car, or walk down the streets of New York City because of the potential for there. It's up to me to, you tell me what to do. So I think if there's if there is one thing to do from that, from the women's side of it, from the Black women's side of it, is instructional stuff. And I know it's asking a lot, and I don't even like saying it right now, but that is the only thing that can come up to me is like, Black man, this is what we need you to do here. And then give the grace to do it. And again, it's very ugly coming out of my mouth right now. I don't like it, but knowing the pride that men have, there needs to be a certain surrender and then following for it to be effective. And I will take full responsibility if I am totally off the mark. But that was my initial reaction. I want to be very transparent right now. That is a tough question to answer.
Yeah, and if I can piggyback off that, I think for the second question, when it talks about centering our voices, I think it's really just, extending our hand, inviting more of us into the work. Up until 2 years ago, when I was invited into this work, many of this was foreign to me. Although I've been 20 years into my professional career, I've been working in mentor, I've been working in fatherhood, I've been working in reentry. And I'm just kind of curious, I know I'm not the only one, but in this domestic violence field, we're often given materials, curriculums to different things. And this is like, oh man, this is great stuff. But it's like, I can't take this back to the hood as is. Like, I've got to add something to it. I've got to translate. There's got to be some massaging here. And that's kind of like, I think the jewel that we have, and the place that we can play in some of this work, is taking it back to some communities that have absolutely been missed.
I agree with all of you. I think another thing that I wanted to add, and this is not me victim blaming, but I definitely, so my sisters, I watch my sisters in and out of violent relationships. And it's because a lot of times they mirror exactly what my mom did, what our mother did. Me and my brothers, we mirrored exactly what our father did. So when I started to become aware, I started to share information with my sisters. And I'm like, if I need you to be more open to the men that you accept into your life. And if they're not, willing to grow with you, you got to be brave enough to say, you know what, this doesn't work for me. And the same thing, I tell young men the same thing, because oftentimes they will engage into a relationship with a woman who does have a violent past. And and they need to understand, we have to definitely impart to them that when you see those signs, you have to address them in a healthy way. And if that person is not willing to grow beyond their trauma, then, maybe relationship. It takes more bravery and courage to not remain in a relationship that's unhealthy. And we make it seem like leaving a relationship, we're failing, but we're actually setting ourselves back if we stay in a harmful environment, because it impacts us, it impacts our children, and that cycle continues on. So a lot of times we don't impart that to young people, that when you're in a violent situation, it's probably because you don't have the coping skills, the emotional fortitude to remain there. And you're not a trained clinician. You're not gonna coach your significant other out of their trauma. That's another thing we have to do. We have to seek professional guidance, professional help. That was something that I was told not to do as a young Black man. What happens in this house stays in this house. And it ended up impacting me for years until I got professional help.
Lamont, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's oftentimes having that hard, brutal conversation with guys. Like in the fatherhood work that I did, oftentimes guys would come to the program and they would say something like, man, if I could just make her, and I'm like, no, you can't make her do anything. You'll never be able to make her do anything. You can maybe try to influence, but you'll never be able to make her. And then guys would say, man, she's doing all this with the child support. She ain't doing this, she ain't doing that. Like, you don't get to control that. You don't control, like, you're wasting time, energy, just kind of focus on what she's doing with your child support. You can't control that. Like, get it out your mind. And the guys that start looking at you with this confused look, like, what do you mean? Like, I should be able to control it. I should be able to, like, no, like, you're wasting energy on something that you'll never be able to control. But however, if you build a relationship, maybe you can have some influence.
Thank y'all. The session is going to end in literally 20 seconds. So I just want to say thank y'all so much for attending this. Thank y'all so much for being a part of this panel. I really appreciate y'all. And oh, y'all won. So if y'all need me on a panel or something, definitely let me know.